Thank you all for being with us this evening. We had, as I said, over 600 people register, even though we only had a few days notice. And it is a holiday week, and we had a Zoom just last Wednesday with over 300 people attending. So clearly people are paying attention. And I think I've mentioned before that when we started, one of the warnings was the people of Pennsylvania will never pay attention. Well, that was wrong. People of Pennsylvania are definitely paying attention. And our legislators are very aware that you are paying attention. And that is incredibly important. So the reason we're here right now is because so many people have paid attention that they are paying attention to us paying attention. So that's a valuable thing. And as we work together, we will get good maps at every level this time around. But the more attention we pay, the better the maps will be. So let's continue to do that work together. You may put in chat who you are, where you are. If you have small technical questions, feel free to throw them in there. But if you have questions that you want to be answered by panelists, please put them in the Q&A. And as you put them in the Q&A, you can also vote up questions that you think are particularly important. And when it comes time to doing the questions and answers, we will take the questions that have been voted up. We'll also take a quick look if we can do specific questions on specific things as we go along. We'll try to do that, but it will really depend on how our time goes. We've got quite a lot to cover and a lot happening. So anyhow, use the Q&A. I'm going to begin by sharing a PowerPoint because there's a lot happening, and this will help my brain stay focused. I have been on calls with all sorts of people trying to dig into maps, and we've been trying to get our heads around these maps that we just saw for the first time on Thursday. So analyzing maps takes work. Thinking through strategy takes work, and I am really appreciative of the Fair Districts PA team. Many of you don't realize, but we have a really strong team of people who work remotely across the state on all kinds of things, digging into data, drawing versions of maps, working on messaging, keeping our website up to date. And some of those are on the panel tonight. But to all of you, whether you're on the panel or in the Zoom room, thank you for your work and your part in helping us stay on top of what's happening and helping us share that information as quickly as we can. So Thursday, the Legislative Reapportionment Commission held a meeting, a voting meeting at 1 o'clock on Thursday. And I'm sharing this page. I'm not expecting you to read it, but the amazing thing was they voted on 2 preliminary maps. Chair Nordenberg read a pretty detailed opening statement with some really thoughtful remarks about the way the process has played out. Also a quote from me about our Fair Districts PA People's Map process. And by the end of the day on Thursday, you could see the recording, you could see his statements, you could see a link to his presentation, a table comparing the maps to the current maps, and links to download the maps and links to submit exceptions, which are basically comments or concerns about the maps. All of this was online by the end of the day. If you were on our forum last Wednesday, you heard my thoughts about how little information is being shared. I was doing a event that Amy was at, and I got way into it before anybody interrupted me to say they couldn't see my screen, which was rather disappointing. So thank you, Amy, for jumping in. Anyhow, but what I've been saying is by the end of the day on Thursday, we had this page that all of these links for all of this information. And this is available. Somebody will put the link to this in the chat. So if you want to find this information, it's all online. Watch the recording of the meeting, opening statements, plan tables, see the maps, submit comments. And this is the kind of transparency that our bill, LACRA, the Legislative and Congressional Redistricting Act, would require, that there'd be one site that gives you all the information you need, and that it would be timely and available in one place for the public to engage with. So this was really encouraging to have take place. Part of Chair Nordenberg's comments had to do with comparing the plans. And I updated it a little bit because I wanted to add our people's plan into his, and I wanted to just kind of clarify where the maps that were submitted stand in terms of analytics. We're going to talk a little bit at the beginning about analytics and scores, because I think that really matters. And then we're going to move into looking at some details with regard to the maps. So in terms of some scores, I'm using Dave's redistricting app scores because they're just easier to understand than some of the other scores out there. But according to those scores, on compactness, the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, the LRC proposal, is better than our current map. Our plan was even better on compactness. Minority representation, LRC better, ours is a little bit better. Splits, the LRC proposal is much, much better than our current House map. Ours is better, but the LRC is even better in terms of splits. And I give you some breakdown in terms of counties, how many counties are split, and then the number of times that counties are split. And on those, again, the LRC did really well in terms of minimizing splits, which is a constitutional requirement. And it did well in terms of compactness. And it did well in terms of minority representation. The deviation was high. The maximum deviation allowed for state, House, and Senate is 10, and this got pretty close to that with 9.29. But that's not a, it's better if it's got a lower deviation, although some people would say very much so. And that's a question we're looking at. How did the deviation play out? But in general score, the LRC proposal is significantly better than our current House, and in some ways better than our People's Map. In some ways, our People's Map was better than the House plan. For the Senate, again, compactness for the Senate was better. Ours was better again. A minority score was a little bit better, not a lot better. Ours was significantly higher. The split score was better, significantly better than the current Senate map. Ours was better. In terms of county splits and number of county splits, again, the Senate map was good. And in terms of deviation, it was a high deviation, 9.59. About twice what our deviation was, but that, again, that's a conversation that could be had. So in terms of these metrics, the LRC proposals are significantly better than the current House and Senate maps, and in some ways, very comparable to ours, our People's plans. The other metric that Chair Nordenberg shared was from the plan score. So plan score is a project of the Campaign Legal Center. They have 5 different metrics that they use to compare to show where a map falls on a bell curve that has to do with measuring different ways to measure partisan bias. So the current House plan, if you look at this, it's pretty far over on the bell curve, definitely a biased plan. The LRC is in this kind of gray balanced zone. This line here would be, if it was a perfectly balanced map, that meant no advantage to Republican or Democrat, it should line up right along that line. This was a 1.0 mean median difference. Ours was 1.2. What that means is on this particular metric, the LRC plan is a little bit more balanced, a little bit more fair than ours, but both ours and the LRC plans are far, far better than the current plan. I see some of you raising your hands. I would say if you have something to say in chat, go ahead, or if you have a question, put it in the Q&A, and probably somebody.
Carol, people are asking what population deviation means.
Oh, excellent. So population deviation is there's an exact number that the district, a perfect district would be. In other words, you take the entire population for the state and divide it by the number of districts. So if there's 50 Senate districts, take the population divided by 50, and that's your target population for that district. Deviation is how many people over or under that is. And so the population deviation percentage is what's the percentage over or under that is. We talked about that last Wednesday, so I forgot that I needed to talk about it again today. For the congressional, it's very, very tight. For the House and Senate, there's a little bit more leeway, and it can be plus or minus 5% from that target population deviation. So as I was saying, the House plan, the current House plan is way, pretty far over on the bell curve, and the LRC and our plans are much closer to the very center, much more balanced. Our current Senate plan, interestingly, is not quite as bad as our current House plan, and the LRC plan is not quite as good as the proposed LRC plan by this metric. Ours is a bit better, but this kind of gives you an idea. So when you see folks kind of waving their hands and saying this is an extreme Democratic gerrymander, no, what we had was a pretty significant Republican gerrymander. What we have proposed is moving back towards the middle, but still with a slight advantage to Republicans. It would be really super difficult to get to this exact line here. And you can see, you know, many maps in Pennsylvania kind of just go that way. But there is, you know, that's the goal, is to have it be balanced. And actually, if you read Chairman Mark Nordenberg's comments, he had some pretty thoughtful things to say about the League of Women Voters lawsuit and how that put in place the requirement that didn't put in place, but it highlighted the fact that Pennsylvania's state constitution says we have the right to free and equal elections. And that means that we need maps that allow our votes to matter. And that means having districts that are as balanced as possible. Amy, if there's more things that I need to know, let me know. So there's some messaging our Fair Districts team has been thinking through. People want to know, what do we think about these maps? So I'm going to pause at a couple of places and just kind of share some of the messaging that we are agreeing on, so that you know, here's what we think. One of the things we think is that the proposed maps reverse decades of partisan gerrymandering to create a more level playing field for PA legislative elections. For decades, districts have been more and more distorted in attempts to keep incumbents in their districts as population shifted. The new maps correct many of those distortions. And according to the metrics that I've just shared and to other metrics, the LRC House plan is a larger improvement than the LRC Senate plan. Hand off now to Keith Forsyth, who's going to introduce Adam Podowitz-Thomas from the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, because we've had some comment and some pushback about the Princeton Gerrymandering Project grades. Some of our legislators have been using those to for their own narrative. And Keith's going to introduce that, and Adam and Keith are going to talk a little bit about the way that those grades work. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Keith, a member of the EC, and we're going to hear now from Adam Podowitz, who's an attorney and the senior legal strategist for the Princeton Gerrymandering Project. He is going to review their scores for these two maps and how they came to them, and then Adam and I will have a short conversation about that afterwards.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Keith, and for the invitation, Carol. I'm going to share my screen because I think it's more useful to talk about these grades by looking at them directly. And I'm going to do my best to speak slowly, because I was actually told earlier today, talking about the grades, that I was talking too fast. So I'm going to try to do it a little slower than I normally speak. So what you have up in front of you all is the Princeton Gerrymandering Project's grade for the proposed state Senate map that was introduced by the LRC that Carol was referencing. What you will see towards the top of the page is the draft map here, and it is color-coded according to the partisan vote share of each of the individual districts. A darker red or a darker blue means it's more strongly either Republican or Democratic, respectively. The lighter shades suggest the district is more competitive. What you can do for any of the individual districts is you can hover your mouse over it, and it will show you the estimated Democratic and Republican vote share, as well as various metrics that we can alter. So right now I actually have the Hispanic voting age population up. You'll see this HVAP number under District 25 where it says it's 2.1%. But up here under tooltip value, you can actually change what the metric is. So you can look at the Black voting age population, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, Pacific Islander, or minority coalition districts. And you can do any of that for all of the districts. The other thing that's nice about our map, and I think makes it a little more user-friendly, is you can say that you'd like to show counties, which I think often helps people sort of orient themselves into the district and understand where the districts are actually located. And then also, like most online map software, you can zoom into a district, right? So if you're really interested in seeing, I'll zoom into an area where there's a lot of districts, the Philadelphia area, and really understanding how these districts line up, which communities are included where, you can zoom actually quite close in and start seeing individual towns pop up. And then overall, the other thing that I think a lot of folks are paying attention to are the grades that we have for these districts. Yeah, Amy, sorry.
People are asking you to slow down a little bit more.
Yeah. Always. Yeah, no, I get that feedback all the time. Sorry. So the right-hand part of my screen has 4 letter grades, and you'll see one says the overall grade for this map is an A. This A is a composite of the 3 scores below it, and we'll talk about how we derived that in just a minute. The next score down is a partisan fairness score, which we also gave an A, and it says over here, no advantage. I'm going to talk in a minute about how we derive partisan advantage, so I will get there in just a moment. Next is the competitiveness score, which we gave a C. And again, it says it is similar to other maps that could have been drawn. It's not particularly competitive, nor is it particularly uncompetitive. It's just average. A C is an average score. It doesn't mean it did anything wrong or anything bad. It's just an average score. And then similarly for geographic features, again, and I'll talk about how we derive all that. So then you can scroll down a little bit on the map or the report card, and you'll see here we go into more detail about partisan fairness. This A grade is derived from 2 things. One is the ensemble that we run. And the ensemble is a computer algorithm that the team runs where we generate 1 million maps. And each of those maps is basically a small change from a previous map, complying with all of the various state law criteria that needs to be complied with. So achieving population equality to the extent that it's required, maintaining Voting Rights Act districts, if those are required, whatever the state law requirements are, our ensemble does it and does it for 1 million different maps. And then we take those 1 million maps and we score every single district in the map according to how it would have voted using an election composite that our team has put together. And that election composite is using statewide elections from Pennsylvania. A key thing to note about the ensemble is it does not move people around the state. It takes into consideration exactly where people live. So if an area is heavily Democratic, when the ensemble operates, that area will remain heavily Democratic. If an area is heavily Republican, it will remain heavily Republican. If it's evenly split, it will evenly split. It's not moving people around. It's not taking into consideration the statewide vote total. It's looking at where people live, and it's drawing 1 million maps with that understanding. And so then when we score those 1 million maps according to the statewide vote totals, what you will always see be the case is you'll get what's called a normalized bell curve. And for those of you who have taken statistics, you know what I'm talking about. It's just that perfectly round, even bell curve that we sort of expect with population distributions. Anything that's squarely within that the heart of the bell curve would be considered average. It would be considered what we expect, what's normal. Anything on the extreme ends of that would be an outlier. It would be unfair, either favoring the Democrats or favoring the Republicans. What you will see here for the Senate map is that this arrow right here shows where we would expect this Senate map to perform on a partisan basis. And you'll see that it's squarely within the A range. It's squarely within the heart of the distribution about what we would expect based on the 1 million maps we drew. The partisan fairness score can also be affected by this competitiveness score that we were referencing. And actually, if we have time, I'll get to the House map and you'll see the House map actually does quite poorly on the competitiveness score and was affecting our partisan fairness score, which is actually one of the reasons we made a modification to it, which I can talk about. But the competitiveness looks to see the same districts using the same elections. How many districts would be centered around the 50% threshold? How many of those districts are 3.5% above or 3.5% below 50% partisan vote thresholds. And we deem those competitive. And we've used that threshold because political scientists have shown that that is the range where districts are the most likely to change control over the course of an election to an election. So over the course of a decade, those are the districts we think are most likely to change hands over many, many elections. I'll go through things a little bit faster because I think that's the most complicated piece. I'll try not to speak faster though. Geographic features are looking at the compactness scores, which Carol referenced earlier. It's just a simple formula where we look at the shape of the districts and how they compare to circles. And you'll see that this map doesn't do particularly well on compactness. It gets an F. But what it does very well is it respects counties. And this goes to the splitting score that Carol was referencing earlier. It's very good. It doesn't split very many counties, and it got an A. So the balance of the F and the A gave it a C in geography. The other thing that this report card provides everyone, let me actually back out here, is partisan composition and minority composition for the map. And what it's done is that it's ranked all of the districts from the single most Republican district to the single most Democratic district. And as you scroll over each of these, you can actually see individual detail. And if these are really too small dots, I find them too small personally. I don't know that everyone does. You can hit show expanded chart and actually much more clearly see the numbers. So if you're looking for a specific district, it's a little easier to find this way. Same exact thing over here on the minority composition chart. Up here, you can select what particular population you're interested in having more information on. So let's say I'm interested in the Black voting age population for the districts. And then these districts are rank ordered from the single least or lowest Black voting age population to the highest Black voting age population. And again, you can hit show expanded chart and really get detailed information about each of these individual districts. I will very, very quickly move to the house map, which looks exactly the same except for one key difference that I do want to point out to everyone, which is that we have reserved an overall grade and a partisan fairness grade for the house map. And I think Keith and I are actually going to talk a little bit about why that is. So I'll actually wait for that conversation. But I do want to note that that difference is there. And you'll see that we have, frankly, a bit of an essay up top that hopefully explains a little bit of that, but I'm hopeful that we can have a conversation here about what this means and potentially answer some folks' questions about that. But with that, I'll happily answer any questions Keith has.
That was an excellent summary. So for the benefit of most of the attendees who haven't delved into the details of these metrics, I don't want to try to really explain any of them, but I want to give the context that obviously, gerrymandering is a complex problem, and to try to find a number or a small group of numbers to encapsulate the essence of such a complex thing is extremely difficult and probably never going to be perfectly accurate. In terms of academic study of this issue, the most common metric is called partisan symmetry, which some people summarize as partisan bias. And basically, it starts with the idea that whatever the map may be, if it treats both parties equally when the vote shifts towards or away from them, then it's a fair map. So if party A gets 60% of the seats for 55% of the votes, that's fine as long as the same thing happens when party B gets 55% of the seats. So that's the essence of that metric. And that is by far the one that most political scientists rely upon. It's been around since 1994. Particularly in the last few years, lots of people have gotten interested in gerrymandering more than ever before. And many new metrics and many new mathematical ways of trying to describe gerrymandering have come into play. One of them being this idea of trying to draw a large ensemble of random maps. And so I think the issue that I and some other people have with the PGP scores here is that when you look at particularly for bias, the traditional metric, different people get different exact numbers when they calculate it, but PGP, Dave's redistricting, and plan score all show that by the traditional Gelman-King metric, both the House and Senate map have slight Republican biases, specifically about in the 3% range for the House and in the 4 to 5% range for the Senate. So when based on that, when we see a rating of that a map is either fair or to both parties or is an ambiguous rating like the House rating, implying that it could be in some sense said to favor Democrats, we don't really understand that because by the more common metrics and also by the mean median metric that Dr. Wang pioneered, it favors Republicans slightly. So I think that's probably the biggest issue that we have with the ensemble method.
Sure. So let me address a couple of points in turn. One, the ensemble method is not actually that new at this point. It's been around for almost 2 decades and has been accepted by courts across the country, both federal and state. So the methodology of using an ensemble to generate maps has been accepted by courts to judge partisan fairness. So I want to be really clear that this method is widely accepted and has been reviewed in the literature. Second, The metrics that you're referring to, such as partisan fairness or partisan bias, excuse me, and mean median, are present on our website. We have those numbers. We actually do have slightly different numbers than Dave's, but I think we're all hovering in roughly the same general ballpark of numbers and expectation of how these maps would perform. So the important thing to think about, I think, when analyzing a map for partisan fairness is there's really two ways to look at it, right? So there's the way that's taking geography into consideration and recognizing that we live in somewhat segregated communities, right? So thinking about the ways that we tend to cluster ourselves among like-minded individuals. The reality is that I think we know that Democrats tend to live near other Democrats, Republicans tend to live near other Republicans. It's certainly not universally true, certainly not true in every community. I'm not trying to paint the entire state in a broad brush, but it is nonetheless generally true. It is generally true that Pennsylvania has a large percentage of its Democratic population clustered in mostly two urban areas, largely the Philadelphia area and largely Pittsburgh. Again, I am not by any means saying that there are not Democrats in other parts of the state. 100% there are. If you don't take that geography into consideration when you're analyzing a map, you're going to ignore how difficult it is for a map drawer to actually draw a map that achieves statewide partisan fairness. You're not actually really thinking about the way that a map has to be drawn to achieve some sort of partisan balance. And the metrics that you're referring to look at statewide elections and look at statewide partisan balance to say, this is the way that the state writ large should have representation look. They're looking at voters, they're looking at people, they're not looking at geography. And what the ensemble does is it considers that geography. It looks at where people are and says, realistically, a fair map that is focused on geography, is focused on not splitting counties, focused on representing communities that are really important measures of how people want to be represented. The ensemble is going to respect those much more than the other metrics are going to, that are looking at statewide vote totals and looking at the way that statewide fairness can be achieved. And so that's part of the reason for our team, why we actually put both metrics on our website, why it's really important actually for us to flag both of them, because different people have different concerns. Some people may say, it's really important to me that my communities be represented, and so I really care about what the ensemble says and about whether it treated these communities fairly. Other people, well within their rights, say, I recognize that I live among people who don't agree with me, but I want my party treated fairly on a statewide basis. And there's a different metric that maybe gives you a hint on that. And actually, the reason that our state house grade changed and the reason we pulled it down was because exactly that conflict, exactly what we're talking about. So the statewide election metrics suggest exactly what you were saying, Keith, that there's a slight Republican bias to this map. And Carol said that in their analysis, and even the FDPA map does that slightly, right? Like that's sort of honestly the nature of the geography of this state.
I think you've expressed it very well. And I don't want to get into a weedy debate about metrics. I would just say that I think that the valuable metrics are the ones that isolate a particular aspect for examination: compactness, splitting of government entities, partisan bias, representing communities of interest, preserving incumbent advantage, whatever. And that whenever you have a metric that mixes more than one concern together, that conflation is not helpful in really understanding the maps.
Well, respectfully, Keith, our grades don't conflate those together. The partisan fairness metric is based solely on the ensembles. I'm explaining that we have all of that data and information on the website. And actually, there's a lot of data and information behind our website. Every single one of the individual charts that I was referencing, for example, you can download as individual tables with district by district breakdown. Our view is that one of the most important things we can do is inform people and give them information so they can make decisions on their own. And I think that that's really important. So.
I get that. All I'm saying is that when your partisan score headline says that a map has mixed partisan advantage, when all of the traditional metrics say that it favors Republicans, I have a problem with that. That's really all I'm trying to say.
Okay, we're going to
Um,
stop here. We're going to stop here. This is a good conversation that needs to be continued elsewhere. Part of my goal just was to, I know some of you have seen grades and you say, oh my goodness, this has a bad grade. We're trying to say there are lots of metrics. It's a lot to think about. And when people say, well, which is the best map? Part of what I want to say is, you know, I think our people's maps are terrific, but I think that the LRC has done some good work. And that's part of what we're talking about tonight, to say, how do we assess that? How do we look at a map and say, hey, this map is good, or you know what, this map isn't going to work, or, you know, we're going to push back hard on this map. That's the conversation that we're in the middle of. And we're trying to gather information so that you can be equipped. And thank you, Adam, for jumping in here at short notice to explain your grade. Thank you, Keith, for raising some concerns. And we're going to have one more person talk a little bit about metrics, and then we're going to look a little bit more specifically at the maps themselves. So Michael Waxenberg, one of our mappers par excellence, is going to share just a little bit about predictive ways of looking at the maps, and he has done some great work on that. I'm going to share my screen and hope that you can see it.
Thank you, Carol. And I probably have the easiest job today. Carol asked me to just cover one specific narrow topic having to do with predicting outcomes, because you're probably seeing a lot of hot takes about the bottom line election day impact of these maps. And Carol thought that this audience would benefit from a little bit of help interpreting that information, maybe separating what's information from what's misinformation or disinformation. So a word about predicting outcomes, and particularly separating models, guesswork, and just flat out spin. First thing I would point out is most of the analysis that you're seeing, even from the best intentioned journalists, lacks nuance and context. And I would specifically caution you against statements of a few forms. The first is the map has X number of Trump districts and X number of Biden districts. That's kind of an interesting set of numbers to look at, but it doesn't really predict anything, because it doesn't tell you whether the Trump districts are heavy, deep red Trump districts or whether they're actually in play. Same with the Biden districts. And those are the kind of subtleties down at the level of individual districts that you have to look at to know whether, you know, 103 Biden districts versus 100 Trump districts is actually meaningful. Macro takes like the map favors Democrats or the map favors Republicans, as the conversation between Adam and Keith implied, those are largely meaningless statements because they could mean almost anything. As they suggested, a map that's drawn strictly based on geography and geometry is going to bake in a Republican advantage just because of the way Democratic votes are concentrated. But on the other hand, a map that goes out of its way to offset that natural geographic advantage for Republicans could be said to favor Democrats, and will tend to be graded, I think, by the Princeton scorecard as rather unfair to Republicans, meaning leaning toward Democrats, because that effort has been made to push it to one end of the bell curve, the natural random distribution of maps generated just on geography. And then, of course, the inside baseball reporting, like Democratic or Republican incumbents are up in arms. They want to distract you from the actual data and information, the facts about the map. And they're also looking for sound bites. So, you know, don't worry about the hot takes from politicians either, or whatever they may hold up in a hearing before they vote on a map. That's mostly misdirection. I would caution you that even the very best models are subject to manipulation and spin. You need to know what historic data sets are being used by whoever's presenting a prediction. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Keep an eye on incumbency effects. This is particularly important when you've got long entrenched popular incumbents. Sometimes a party will feel more comfortable putting an incumbent that they know is very strong at risk mathematically, because the reality is they're going to win anyway. Once you get to the advanced level, you can start trying to understand the measures of bias that Keith and Adam were talking about. I don't recommend tackling that at the 101 level. It's like 301 level graduate work. I'm not there yet. I mean, I always insist at the beginning of these conversations when I'm involved that there should be no math at all, because I don't understand it. Above all, maintain humility, because any prediction is subject to subtle errors that can throw off predictions completely. And by all means, ask questions. I mean, you listen to experts on these models talk, it can be overwhelming. And it does make me feel kind of dumb when I don't understand it, because I'm supposed to be this mapping expert and the stuff's going over my head. There are no stupid questions where maps or predictions are involved. Carol, let's go on to the next slide, and I'll just show you how sensitive these predictions are to your choice of data. Dave's redistricting app has a number of election data sets available. And as a mapper, you can choose whichever one you want. And depending on which data set of historic election data you choose to use, you can end up with wildly different results. And I'll just use the proposed preliminary Senate map from the LRC as an example. Dave's has a really good election composite data set that goes back to 2016, and it includes all of the elections since 2016 at the statewide level. That introduces some issues that I'll come to in a moment. If you use that composite, you're assuming that the Democrats will win about 52.5% statewide. They don't generally do that in by-elections. And even if they do it, the model predicts that they'll take about 25 to 26 seats. I think that's not bad. That's pretty proportional. They're winning a little over half of the vote. They're winning a little over a half of the seats. But look what happens if you vary the selection of data. If you go to 2020 presidential, and Biden did win Pennsylvania, you're now down to 24 seats out of 50. You go to 2016 presidential, when Trump won narrowly, the Democrats had 40 and almost 50% of the two-party vote, and they're down to 22%. I'm sorry, 22 out of 50 seats predicted. And then you can look at the outliers, Casey and Toomey. Interesting about Toomey, the Democratic vote share wasn't that much lower in the McGinty-Toomey election than in the Trump 2016 presidential election, but the vote distribution was different. Trump was strong in different areas than Toomey, and that has a big effect too, because if you go by Toomey's vote distribution, the Republicans actually win some suburban districts that they don't win in the Senate if you go by where Trump was strong. So again, I'm just showing this to show, first of all, how sensitive the predictions are to this arbitrary selection of a data set that anybody can manipulate, but also to show the impact of what we talked about earlier, the concentration of Democratic votes, which leads Democrats to need more votes to get the same share of seats. Not saying that's good or bad or right or wrong, it's just how it is. And with that, I will hand back to Carol, and I'll hang around for questions later on, but I will check the Q&A.
Two questions, Michael. So for the proposed LRC maps, your sense is that they would be a bit of a toss-up for Democrats and Republicans, or would Democrats consistently win, or would Republicans consistently win?
You promised there wouldn't be math, Carol, or predictions. I don't know. I think the Senate breaks fairly evenly, but it also breaks fairly consistently with a narrow Republican advantage. And that partly reflects what appears to have been some incumbent protection all the way across the state, agreed between the caucus leaders. But that's an impression. I mean, if you go district by district, you find that most of the incumbents who are running for re-election are probably very safe on that map.
Okay, one other question for anybody who wants to take it from the panel. Can you explain how mean median works?
I'm staying away from that one, Carol.
It's a math question. So Keith is going to take it, looks like.
Okay, so this was, if my memory is correct, this was introduced by Professor Wang from Princeton, and it's a simple way of identifying packing and cracking, which are the two sort of hallmark methods for producing a gerrymander. And I can't get into everything about it because we don't have time, but you calculate the median vote share. In other words, half of the contests have a higher share and half lower, as well as the average share, and subtract the mean from the median. And if the median is greater than the mean, then this suggests that the share of that the party A packed and cracked the alternative party. This is one of these things where you really have to sit down and read one of the explanations to really get it. But it's another way to think about it is that if it's a fair plan, the distribution of the votes should be quasi-normal, and so the mean and the median should be the same. But if it's some kind of wacky distribution that's produced by intentional gerrymandering, the mean and median will be different. So I would encourage you to look at some of the papers that Professor Wang wrote about this to understand this this phenomenon. Is probably the best way. There's also a great book about metrics called Gerrymandering in America by Tony McGann and a group of other people that talk about it.
Okay, well, thank you. We're going to move on from metrics, and we're going to look a little bit at maps and answer some questions regarding the maps. And so we're going to start with the House map. And one of the first questions is it we were proposing LACRA, the Legislative and Congressional Redistricting Act. It's not in law, it's not required. And yet, we think it's a really good way to evaluate maps. And so one question is the House map LACRA compliant? And that means, did it strive to balance compactness, minimizing splits, ensuring minority representation, trying to minimize partisan bias? Did it take into accommodation public input? And one other piece for LACRA compliance, two other pieces. One is not splitting precincts and not dividing counties more than mathematically necessary +2 for the House. So our assessment so far is that, yes, this map is LACRA compliant. It does those things. It does not split any county more than mathematically necessary +2. It has no split precincts, and it looks like it did a pretty good job of balancing the various metrics, compactness. It is completely contiguous as far as we can tell. Our current House map is not, even though our Constitution requires contiguity. So we think that this map does meet our LACRA requirements. Does it do a good job of including public input? We're not there yet in our assessment, and this is where we need you to help us. As you look at this, does it do the things that you asked to have done? And so things like not splitting college campuses. There's a lot of college campuses in Pennsylvania. We haven't had a chance to take a look at those. One of the things that we use as kind of a indicator of communities of interest is school districts, but Pennsylvania has a lot of very difficult and strangely shaped school districts. So some of those have to be split. We have found it's impossible to draw a map without splitting some school districts. But if you look at your county and find every school district is split, that's a problem. So we're asking you to take a look at your county and see, does it look like it is sensitive to the needs of the people in the county, or does it look like it just kind of, just sliced and diced? How did it do on minority representation? One of the questions is, how did it do? Did it use the unity maps? We worked with Pennsylvania Voice. They worked with minority communities across the state to propose unity maps that were composites of more than 700 maps drawn by individuals in minority communities across the state. We incorporated those into our People's House map. Did the LRC map use those? So we're going to take a look at some of this on the question of the unity districts. Interesting thing that I just learned today, and I have to apologize, I did not have a lot of time to prepare for tonight. So I threw a PowerPoint together, but sometimes I pause and look like my mind is not totally as crisp as maybe it should be. It's because I've just been cramming things into my brain, really fast for the past couple of days, and it has not all processed in there. And my computer is kind of doing that grinding thing that computers do, and my brain is doing the same thing. Minority representation, I learned today that Minority Leader Joanna McClinton actually hired a VRA expert to draw minority districts for the House map. So from what I can tell, that expert looked at our our Pennsylvania Voice unity districts, and in some cases used parts of them, but actually went past them to create VRA compliant districts, that is more than 50% voting age population of particular minority groups. And one of the things that was very interesting in Chair Nordenberg's presentation was, he talked about, I think I skipped, yeah, he talked about the creation of, I think I might have skipped more than, I'm going backwards. Yeah, he said this plan includes 7 minority opportunity districts. Some are true VRA districts, some are minority influence districts, some are coalition districts in which there is no incumbent, creating special opportunities for the election of minority representatives. That was part of his opening remarks. And apparently this was a conversation between Minority Leader Joanna McClinton and I believe the mapper that was hired by the commission, Jonathan Service, to maximize the influence of minority members. Often if there's an incumbent, it's hard for somebody new to feel like they can break in and they can get elected. And so part of the process in this was to actually carve out some districts that don't have incumbents that have significant minority populations. There were 2 in Philly with minority Black populations. This one is in the Powelton Village part of Philly. This one is in the Oxford Circle only part of Philly. The first one was more than 50% African-American. This one is more of a coalition district. It's actually got a pretty substantial Asian population, a Hispanic population, and a Black population. So those are an interesting concept that opened the door to definitely having more minority representation and inviting new voices into our legislature. Another one is in Allentown. We have not yet had a Latino representative from Allentown, and this we had looked at ways to put that into our people's map. This actually figured out how to achieve a 50% voting age population for Latinos in the Allentown area, not all within Allentown, but Allentown area. Another one of those is this was an interesting approach, and some of us mappers have looked at Hazleton in Luzerne County and that area and realize there's a growing Latino population that's kind of isolated there. Their mapper put together an opportunity district for Hispanics in that particular part of the state. Another one is Norristown, which is a Black community in Montgomery County, and that carved out not a voting rights compliant Section 2 compliant district, but a coalition district in the Norristown area. Another one in the Dauphin County area to add a minority coalition district on the edge of Harrisburg into Swatera. And there was some angst over dividing Harrisburg to do that, but a sense of this expands minority opportunity, and this opens a district without an incumbent that would perhaps expand opportunity there. So that's, I think, a real positive in the House map. When I looked at those, I thought, yes, I do believe that the House map does a really good job of expanding opportunity for minority representation, both with those districts that have no incumbent, but also, there are other districts that are certainly minority districts. We already have some Hispanic representatives. We have a group of African-American and an Asian representative. This leaves those districts in place, but adds some new opportunities. And what that does, though, one of the complaints that we've heard is that there are incumbents who are going to run against each other. And this is something that's happened in the past, but not at the level that it's going to happen this time if this map is approved. In the past, there's been maybe 1 or 2 situations where incumbents are running against each other. The number at this point would be 6 districts where Republicans would be facing each other in the primary, 1 district where Democrats would be facing each other, and 4 districts where Republicans would be facing Democrats. And that has some people really kind of outraged or offended or saying this is unconstitutional, all sorts of things. Here is our thought on this again. So I'm sharing some messaging that we've been working on, and this I believe is really accurate. Corrections to past gerrymandered districts mean some incumbents will now be facing colleagues in primary elections. More R incumbents are affected because there are more R elected officials. And they primarily are seated in areas that have been losing population. This is a math issue. They're in areas losing population, they end up facing each other, and there are more of them. This is the result of bringing the maps back to a neutral condition that complies with the Constitution and with court decisions. And I want to show you a few of these so you understand what we're talking about. So in the Mercer, Lawrence, Beaver area, there are these districts. And when we looked at gerrymandered districts, some of these were the worst, are the worst. So we have this one, District 10, that is not actually contiguous. It's got several parts that are not contiguous. It does these weird things about wandering along the edge of Lawrence County into Beaver County, into Butler County. It's not, you know, it is contiguous marginally here in Grove City or Slippery Rock. Slippery Rock University is there. And so we've got these, yeah.
We're only seeing part of the slide. We see a big
Well,
blank
I'm
square.
actually, you're seeing
it's
the
on
slide,
purpose.
I'm gonna add something. This is
Okay.
on purpose. I'm going to do a comparison so you can see something. So I know that is alarming, but so, and this district actually goes all the way up to Erie. It goes through four counties to get to Erie. So an area that was really concerning to us, if you look at where the legislators live, one of the questions I always had was, this looks like gerrymandering, but why would they do that when these are all Republican areas? So they're not getting any partisan advantage. When you look at where people are, you say, oh, these people live, you know, these are districts drawn because these people live too close to each other. These are legislators who live very close to each other. So if you draw a new district, a new map that gets rid of some of that nonsense, that firms up those districts, that keeps them. So Mercer and Lawrence together should have 3 districts. Before they had, what, 5 districts wandering around? And so they had 5 legislators living very close. What happens when you redraw it and you put 3 districts where you had pieces of 5, but you still have those 5 legislators? You've got a problem, right? So that's exactly what's happened. And so you have 2 in this district who are going to have to face off against each other, and 2 in this district who are going to have to face off against each other. Now, is that being done out of malicious intent by those who are drawing the maps? Or is this just a fact that these maps for decades have been more and more distorted for all sorts of games? And when you bring them back to a more level, when you bring them back to more compactness, when you bring them back to represent counties better, you end up with legislators facing each other in the elections. Now, another example here is in Lehigh County, you've got these 2 districts, 187 and 134, that those, I believe, are partisan gerrymanders. They were drawn to dilute the vote of these blue areas. And so those blue areas were divided out into red areas. So you've got these districts that go from Lehigh into Berks County, just kind of wandering around to offset the, you know, one is offsetting Kutztown with Kutztown and Macungie, and the other is offsetting Lower Macungie with other parts of Berks. So when something like that happens and you redraw it to be a more compact district, what happens? Well, in this case, you end up with 2 Republicans facing off each other. One more, just so you get an idea, when people say, well, they shouldn't be putting incumbents against each other, how would you handle it when you've got incumbents who are close together and you're trying to get your districts to be more fair? On the edge of Allegheny County into Washington County, there are these 3 districts, and this should never be done. So you've got 3 districts wandering over the boundary from Allegheny County into Washington County. And when you go to redraw that, and here's the reasoning. So you're trying to balance out the blue in this part of Allegheny County by drawing it out into the red of Washington County. So in an area that could have had at least 1 Democratic district, probably 1 swing district and 1 red, you end up with 3 pretty safely red districts. So when you look at where the incumbents live, what you find is you've got 1 living right on the line here and 2 in Washington County, but representing these parts of Allegheny County, even though they don't live there. So Allegheny County is losing representation. When you redraw that to try to get them to stay in one county or the other, you end up with a problem because you've got a couple of legislators in the same district. Again, they're going to have to face off against each other. So this is not malicious intent. This is not anybody trying to be unconstitutional. This is a simple reality of when you take a gerrymandered map and try to ungerrymander it, you end up with legislators having to face off against each other in the primary. One more thing I want to say about the House map. So I think Michael mentioned somebody waving things before they make a speech. House Majority Leader Carrie Benninghoff was very unhappy with the House map, voted against it, and waved a map of a district saying this is the ultimate gerrymander. What's interesting is the district that he was waving is a Republican district, and this is the one, 84. It weaves around 83, which is, so this is in Luzerne County, Lycoming County. I get my counties mixed up. Lycoming County, it weaves around Williamsport. And I remember meeting with Representative Garth Everett when he was the head of the House State Government Committee, and he pointed to the map on the wall. He was in District 84, and he said, well, people say that my district is gerrymandered, and it looks like it is, because it looks like this weird donut with a donut in, a donut hole in the middle. He said, but it's actually drawn to respect that Williamsport is its own community and to keep Williamsport intact. And so that's really part of what's happening with this particular district. It's keeping Williamsport intact. But the other thing it's doing is actually trying to keep some Republican incumbents in their own district. So it was drawn not to give a big advantage to Democrats. There's really no way to give advantage to Democrats in that part of the state. It's pretty heavily red. It was done to protect an incumbent, and yet it was used to attack the map that was being proposed. I'm going to go on. I don't have as much to say about the Senate, but I want to say a few things about the Senate, and then we are going to pause and take some questions and maybe look a little bit more at parts of the map that you want to look at. So the Senate map, same questions. Is it LACRA compliant? Actually, it's not. So Montgomery and Luzerne County are split more than necessary +1. Luzerne is split 4 times instead of the 3. Montgomery is split 6 times instead of the 5, and quite a few of the incumbents for Montgomery would actually not be in Montgomery County. There's only one minority opportunity district of the kind that Chairman Nordenberg talked about, and it has not been well received. And so the idea was to have a district without an incumbent that would provide an opportunity for Hispanic voters in the Allentown area. What's really odd about this district, if you're proposing it as a minority district, is it has very little of the actual minority community that you would want. It goes up into the kind of the Slate region of Northampton County. And the other thing that this district does, which has caused quite a bit of angst and concern, is it divides both Bethlehem and Allentown. So this has not been well received. Folks point to the fact that if you look at the Hispanic voting age population for this, where did my, now I'm going backwards, I'm so sorry. Yeah, if you look at the proposed voting age population for this, it's 27.9. If you look at the current district in this area, this one has 27.9 also. Now, this is Senator Lisa Boscola's office district. It has a lot of Northampton County. It has Easton, all of Bethlehem, and then some areas around Allentown. And even that district is a little odd. So it has a 27.9. If that's your goal, you could leave that district as is, although there is an incumbent. And our proposed People's District actually did a little bit better, 29.7. We've realized since then that ours is not ideal either. It splits Bethlehem, which there's been a lot of folks saying, Bethlehem is a city. It shouldn't be split. And it's split along county lines, but that doesn't mean that the city itself needs to be split between districts. And also a lot of concern that Allentown is larger, gets the attention. And if you have a district that is all of Allentown, and part of Bethlehem gets no attention, but even worse would be a district that has part of Allentown and part of Bethlehem. Now, you start to think, why would anybody do that? If you were to look at the demographics, this would be the best way. This is better than our People's Map. This is the density of the Hispanic population in that area. You could draw a perfect Senate district right there. That's the exact population for Senate district. And there you would get a 42.646 minority, 29.3 Hispanic. There's no good way to get you can't get to a voting rights section 2 Hispanic district, but you can get a good opportunity district. And so you start to say, well, why did they suggest this odd district? And anybody who knows the region will tell you it's because Senator Pat Brown lives in Allentown, and he is a Republican. And he can't win in Allentown, so he needs to have a different district in order to be able to win. So if you look here, here's how this district map is proposed. This is the LRC's proposed Senate map. Here's where Senator Patrick Brown lives. And here are the demographics for his proposed district. It's not a super safe district, but it is safe enough that a Republican who's been in office for a long time should be able to hold on to that district. Which raises the question, is it appropriate to be drawing districts that give an advantage to one incumbent senator and divide a whole city or divide a whole community to make that happen? And how long will that incumbent senator be there? We don't know. How long will the people of Allentown be there? They'll be there for the next decade. And they'll be struggling with the fact that they have poor representation and a divided community. And Bethlehem will be struggling with the same thing for the next decade if this particular configuration goes forward. So you may have heard already, there is a lot of outcry from the region, and we will probably be joining in thinking about ways to push back on that particular configuration. Now, there was one other minority Latino district of concern to us, or an idea that we had proposed, because Pennsylvania's never had a Latino senator and we have a growing Hispanic population. And how can that population get better representation? So we had suggested in our people's map it's not a voting rights section 2 district, but it's a district that would give opportunity to a growing Latino population. There's the demographics for that. So it would be a bit of a coalition district, but Latinos would be the largest population group there, more than the white population, more than the Black population, which would give a really good opportunity to elect a Latino senator. Did that idea get picked up and put into the Senate map? No, it did not. So if you look, you'll see that that district would be right here. It's actually, that section is actually divided into 3 in this particular map. So the Hispanic population in that part of Philadelphia is divided into 3. And if you look closely, you'll realize that the proposed Senate map is very, very, very close to the existing Senate map. And when you look at where incumbents are, you realize this has a lot more to do with incumbents than it does to do with communities, than it does to do with voters, or how to make sure that there's good representation for the people of Pennsylvania. So we're starting to look across the state and realizing for the Senate map, there's a lot of that, which brings up the question of buddy manders, the question of, was this just the leaders on both sides saying, you carve out safe districts for your folks, I'll carve out safe districts for my folks, we'll shake hands, we'll be happy. It'll all be fine. It's looking a little bit that way. So there are specific areas we would like to see drawn differently, specific areas that seem to harm communities for the benefit of individual legislators. We will offer comment. We will propose alternatives. We will probably be drafting a Fair Districts PA proposed revision for both House and Senate. For the House, small tweaks. For the Senate, large revisions, I'm pretty sure. We'll be doing what we can to ensure fair districts for all of us. And I encourage you to review maps, offer comments, and we will have Mapping Monday open houses on January 3rd and 10th, so people can call in. We'll share the Zoom and email sometime before then, but so people can call in or Zoom in and look at maps more closely and share their own thoughts about what it should be. And Ruth Yeiser is our outreach coordinator. When we did polling place outreach, Ruth was the one who ran that, but she's also an amazing mapper. She and Michael were our, our lead mappers for our mapping work. So Amy and Ruth are curating questions for us. They're going to throw questions to us, and any panelists can answer questions. And go for it, Amy.
But I would say one good question immediately is, these maps appear to be improvements. Are they really what may be put into effect, or are they just to keep us occupied and mollified when the last minute switch will occur?
Yeah, and that kind of goes with another question I saw, which is how do these maps get ratified? So here's how it works. So we've got 30 days. January 18th is the deadline. If you want to offer comments, if you want to offer revisions, whatever you want to offer, January 18th is the deadline. Nothing will be entertained after January 18th. Immediately after January 18th, they will be scrambling to negotiate final maps. Now, my understanding is that whatever comes will be based on these maps. They have had some really challenging negotiations to get to this point. And no one's going to go start over, I'm pretty sure. But if there can be changes that the commission will agree to, those changes will be incorporated. I do know that no one is completely happy with either of these maps. I think that there are people who are very unhappy. So for instance, we know that Representative Kerry Benninghoff and most of his caucus is very unhappy with the House map. We know that Leader McClinton is quite happy with the House map. We know that some of her contingent, some of her caucus would prefer to have safer districts for themselves. That's not going to happen. So there's questions around the House map. We know that Senator Kim Ward said she would vote for the Senate map just to move the process forward, but there are changes that she wants. I think that there is not much agreement on those changes because she would like to push it to be safer for her caucus, and it's already overly safe for her caucus and can't go any further in that direction. So there's going to be a lot of negotiation. Our goal in this is to push hard for the best possible maps that we can, and to be clear. So the House map, as clear as I can say, the House map is quite good, but there are some sections that need to be looked at. We'd like to hear from you about what you think those are, but we have some thoughts. But in general, the House map is quite good. The Senate map, as you heard, the Allentown, Lehigh Valley, Bethlehem, no, that doesn't work. That proposed minority district does not work. Carving a little bit of Allentown out for Senator Pat Brown does not work. And so we need to be really clear. No, that's exactly what we do not want to see. And we can do better. I think the Philly area, the Montgomery County for sure, Luzerne County divided up as it is. So really, I have to say that the western part of the state on the Senate map seems to have fared pretty well. And if you think about it, the two Senate leaders are from the Pittsburgh area. The mapping team is from the Pittsburgh area. They don't know this side of the state very well. And so even if all of them wanted the best for all of us, it's hard for them to do that when they don't know the eastern side. And I confess I'm on the eastern side. Others of you are not, but I'm in Chester County. So I think it's really important for us to say this might work pretty well for the western part of the state. It doesn't work so well for the eastern part of the state, and we've got some really good ideas to fix it. So we're going to be working on that. How it gets ratified, though, then once they negotiate their final maps, they come back and they vote, and then those maps are handed off to us, the people, to if we're aggrieved, then we file grievances with the court, and the court takes a look at those grievances. If the court thinks we've got a case, then the court can ask the LRC to redraw the map or to fix parts of the map. All of this happened in 2011. There was lots of aggrievement on the 2011 map. A lot of people appealed to the court. That's where Amanda Holt was successful in getting the maps redrawn because there were too many splits. And so it can go back to the Legislative Reapportionment Commission. It's a process. So it's really important for us to continue to engage in the process and to be as clear as we can about what a good map would be. And that's why we're talking here tonight.
There's a question for Adam. You're looking at this at the 30,000 square foot, meaning primarily all of PA. However, the gerrymandering or focus on incumbents are at the county or below level, which is how you gerrymander, but make the numbers look reasonable. Is Princeton looking deeper or only at the highest levels?
I do think that the analysis is very much directed at the state level. And so to the extent that folks have concerns about specific legislators that they think are being protected or specific communities that they don't think are being well protected, our metrics are not going to do particularly well for you. That's just true. And that is true for every metric from every one of these sites. Dave's is not going to give you better metrics on whether COIs are protected. It's not, they're not designed to do that. And that's, I think, really goes to one of the points that Carol just made, which is it really is up to individuals to speak up and say, this is something that really matters to me. This is something that I care about, and make it clear to the folks that are responsible for map drawing what they should be prioritizing, because these metrics are not going to accomplish that. I do want to very briefly plug one of the organizations we've worked with that does do some of this work, which is representable.org. They're a website that our team helped put together that collects community of interest information, and I'll put the name of it in the chat in a minute. They collected community of interest information and worked with folks on the ground to make sure that communities that traditionally haven't been part of the redistricting process had an opportunity to have their voices heard. They're still collecting that information. And one of the really nice things they'll do is they'll actually give it the proposed community to you in a format that is the format that the map drawers use. So you don't have to figure out how to use the mapping software. They'll do it for you. And then you can use that to submit it to the LRC and say, this really matters to me. So yes, our metrics aren't good for those individual questions, but there are other tools out there, and I really encourage you to use them.
Does Fair Districts have a map they think is best for PA?
Here's the problem. Our people's maps were not drawn with attention to incumbency. And so there's, I think Chairman Nordenberg did a really good job of saying, this commission, 4 out of 5 members of this commission are legislative leaders. Their constituents are legislators, and they keep their leadership role by keeping the legislators in their caucuses happy. So, so incumbency is really important to them. And I have to say, so Representative McClinton, in tackling incumbency, in drawing districts that put some of her own caucus at risk, she's that's a really courageous thing to do. I have to say, I have great admiration for her being willing to do that, to say, it is important for us to have better representation. And the only way we get there is by refusing to play this, I keep all my people safe, you keep all your people safe, and the people of Pennsylvania, who cares what happens to them, which is what happens most of the time here. She has refused to play that. And not all of her caucus is happy with her. But so the best maps would be ours, of course, but those are not going to get passed. And so, as I said, we are going to be working on revisions that work within the framework of the incumbent situation that we're faced with. And where we feel like there's some kind of legal pressure that we can put, or where we can put enough community pressure, we're going to push to get changes. But we're not going to be able to get all the changes that we want. There are going to be places that we can even look at now and say, that's obviously not going to change. We're going to leave that alone. But where we think we could get some leverage, we're going to try to push the maps to be better. So right now, no, there's no perfect map out there. There's no perfect map that we can support that would get through the commission. Our job is to come up with provision, some kind of proposal, revision proposals that might sway that process a little bit towards something better. That's our goal. And are they open to revision? They are open to revision. Are they open to all revision? I'm sure not. Will they be open to our revisions? Some of them maybe, and that's what we're going to be working towards.
Okay, we have another question. What makes it so difficult to have proportional representation by political party?
Well, so in Pennsylvania, actually, Sharon Nordenberg raised a thing that I had not really thought about, which is, Philadelphia is landlocked, snug, fast up against the Delaware River and the county line, the state border. So if you look at states where the state, the urban dense pack is more centralized, then you can draw districts in a way that kind of maximizes that population in not having it so densely packed. But we end up with some Democratic districts that are like 95, 97% Democratic, and you can't change it because of the way that the city population is is packed in. So I think part of it is demographic sorting, but part of it is Pennsylvania's geography, the way, and not only Philly, but there are some other of our cities that are like smack up against rivers or smack up against other things that make it a little bit more difficult. But Philly is really the big issue. I think New York City is probably one other state that has that same issue. New York City just being, smack up in the corner of the state. But that's a big piece of it.
Somebody's asking if we have comments or talking points that folks should use when submitting maps to the LRC, or submitting feedback to the LRC. And I would say, I don't know if we have specific feedback, but we encourage people to look very carefully at their own district and provide comments that are relative to their life, where they live, they know the area. And those personal stories are what's important. Ruth, did you see any other questions?
I think you hit on the big one. There have been a number of questions, what happens if they don't get this done on time?
Yeah, so what happens if they don't get it? I know that Chairman Nordenberg is committed to pushing, to keeping them moving forward on a reasonable schedule. I know his goal had been to have it done sooner. I know that the negotiations have been challenging, which I think he hinted at in his comments. And I don't think any of them felt like they had come to a real conclusion point, but they did the vote just to keep the process moving forward. Will they be willing to vote on a map that they're not 100% happy with when the changes come and they begin to do changes? My original thought was they'll make changes quickly and vote it out again fast. And after watching how this process has played out, it's like, I don't know if they'll make changes quickly. They have 30 days to make changes once that January 18th deadline comes. I am sure that Chairman Nordenberg is going to be trying to do it faster, but getting it done faster with the negotiations that are going to be needed will be hard. And then there's the 30-day window for people to be aggrieved to file appeals with the court. So I think it seems quite likely there will need to be adjustments on the way the primary plays out. And I've heard rumblings that they're going to probably have to change the primary date. There might be folks hoping that they use the same districts that we have now for the 2022 election. I know there will be litigation. The minute somebody breathes that, there will be folks saying that's malapportionment, dilution of vote, because the population has changed so significantly. Our minority populations have grown so substantially. There will be a strong legal push to make sure that we have new maps for 2022. But I think it's unlikely that the primary will stay at its current timing.
Harrisburg is split into 3 sections on the House map. Why is that okay, but Allentown, Bethlehem, and the Senate side is not?
So I would say as you look at maps and you see things that concern you, throw them in chat right now for us if there's things, but also email advocacy at fairdistrictspa.com, and we'll try to. Is there a better way to gather that information right now? As we are looking at revisions, we're going to be looking at places that people are concerned about. I will say though, it's different to, my sense is it's different to split a city on a Senate map and a House map. House districts are smaller, they're closer. And Harrisburg metro area, we've had a lot of testimony about the Harrisburg metro area, that it's Harrisburg proper and the Harrisburg metro area. State colleges is a similar conversation. It's like, well, is it just the state college or is it the metro area that matters? And so there's been lots of conversation about that. And I do know that Harrisburg metro folks feel like, we don't just live in Harrisburg, we live in Swatara, we live in Lower Paxton, we are a larger community than that. And if drawing a map can get better representation from minority members in that area and broader representation than just packing all the Democrats into one district, which sometimes happens, it's worth splitting Harrisburg. So I do know that there's been lots of opinion about what the right way to map Harrisburg is, as there's been lots of opinion about the State College area as well. So there's lots of things to balance, but if you have thoughts on that, we'd love to hear them. And we also suggest you submit them to the LRC.
A lot of the questions are very specific to district, and I haven't really been looking at the chat, but did Monday mapping conversations come up again as a possibility?
Yeah, so we will do Monday mapping, not this next Monday, because we're going to take a week off. We deserve it. But we will resume Monday mapping on January 3rd. And is that Monday?
Yes.
Yeah, January 3rd and January 10th, we will have mapping conversations. So we will share a Zoom link in an email before then. We will have mappers available to look more closely at specific locations. And we will send a follow-up email in the next day or two that has a lot of the links that we talked about so that you can look at maps. And I will say, so talking points, I shared talking points throughout the video of our broader view of this, that these are an improvement, that they are not democratic gerrymanders, that the House map in particular really meets a lot of the goals that we had set for ourselves. The House map is quite good. No map is perfect, and there are probably places we can fix it in little bitty ways, but in general, it really does maximize representation for minority communities, and it lessens the bias that we've seen for so long. And you know, we could all see some things that we might want to change a little bit here and there, but in general, the House map is quite good. The Senate map, from what we're seeing, it's got quite a lot of incumbent protection built into it, and that kind of works against us as voters. And so there's more room for change in the Senate map, and we need to look more closely. So any of those talking points, feel free to put those into your testimony. But as Amy said, the best testimony is specific to say, you know, this is how Allentown would be harmed if you drew that district that way. Or this is how we feel in Philly when we continue to have districts drawn to benefit, you know, one senator who's been here a long time and who gets to choose her family and her friends and all of those folks in her own special district. That is not helpful to us as Pennsylvanians. So those are the kinds of things you want to think about. You want to make your own comments as specific as you can, as local as you can. And I would say also, we want to keep attention on the press on this. So, you know, feel free to write letters to the editor about the process, about how the process matters, about how people should be looking at the maps, about how we don't want districts drawn to, you know, give incumbents their own safe little districts, that we want districts drawn to give us real representation. And we just want to keep making that point. Thank you all who have written. We've had an amazing number of people write letters to the editor. You are phenomenal. Keep doing it. And also feel free to write to the leaders who are involved in this, to say, we like this, we don't like this. I mean, they get your comments, but you can also write to them as people, because we have no guarantee that, let me put it this way. We know for sure that Chairman Nordberg and his mapping team are reading every single comment. We have no assurance of any kind that the other commissioners have read a single word. So sending them an email to say, just make sure that you are hearing, this is my thought on the map, is a perfectly fine thing to do. And let me just remind you, the congressional process is continuing to happen. We did not talk about it tonight. There is a preliminary map out there. We are not fans of it. We don't know what's going to happen with that map, but we will continue to be looking at it. We will probably be creating our own revision map for that as well, with less confidence that it would be considered or used, but we could still, I think we are still thinking about doing that. But again, offer comment on that as well, offer, you know, letters to the editor, and feel free to compare that wonderful page I showed you that Chairman Nordenberg provided for us, and what can you find from Chairman Grove? Very little. Can you find anything from Chairman David Argel? Zero, nothing. So feel free to call attention to those who promise transparency and give us nothing, and how this commission is doing a better job on that. But we will take a little bit of time off and And we will also be doing some mapping, and we will be following the process. So thank you all for jumping onto a call at such short notice. Thank you for paying attention to the issue. As I said, we will get you an email probably by Wednesday morning with all the links that you want, and then you will not hear from us for a number of days. I hope you can live without hearing from us for a week or two, but we will get you what you need by Wednesday. Thank you for being with us. Good night.